He used to work 10, 12 hours a day. He'd go to work in the morning before I was up, and I was in bed before he came home. He worked a lot of them shifts. I didn't see him, especially in the winter times when it gets dark so quick. And we had a rule here, brother. We were so tired, 8 o'clock, we went to bed. We never had no lights, no electric lights. What did you have? What was you going to do?
The people at that time, they thought, well, they were coming to a rich country and that they would have a better living. But they didn't, because there wasn't a better living here at that time. Then after things started to build up, but the miners had the roughest.
What it means to be an American, I'm glad I'm one. I'm born here. I have that ethnic background. I'm glad of that too. I think it means a little bit from a family's history, of what they lived through. I'm glad they came here.
These people are the sons and daughters of coal miners. Their labor, like the labor of their fathers and mothers before them, served as the backbone of our nation's industrial revolution. Their story is about hard work, family, community, fairness, and the hopes of achieving the American dream. The following story investigates how they attempted to achieve their goals in the early 20th century, particularly in the decade following the First World War, the 1920s. This decade is seen as a transitional period where America begins to develop aspects that still dominate our culture and society today. Those aspects were consumerism, nationalism, the celebration of wealth, and the success of big business. While the Jazz Age, the era of Prohibition, and the flappers swept the nation, workers who found themselves in declining sectors of the economy, such as coal mines in central Pennsylvania, faced a world that was characterized by strikes, racial and ethnic prejudice, internal union conflict, union-busting employers, a biased legal system, and some of the worst regional poverty in U.S. history. The struggle of those early miners was a struggle of hard-working, underpaid laborers who spent long hours every day in substandard working conditions that would be hard to even envision today. Yet, back-breaking labor still meant families barely eked out a living, and workers had no recourse against the low salaries and murderous working conditions they were forced to endure. The struggle toward the American dream was a struggle that pitted those early miners against the strength and power of big business and big profits.
Down in the coal mine, underneath the ground, where a gleam of sunshine never can be found, digging dusky diamonds all the year around. Down in a coal mine, underneath the ground.
The major transformation in the coal industry in the years before World War I was the growth of mining in southern Appalachia, primarily southern West Virginia, Kentucky, Tennessee, and northern Alabama, where the geology of the coal mines and the nature of the seams made the cost of mining relatively economical, where the union was generally absent, where wages tended to be much lower, and the growth of southern Appalachian mining threatened the old central competitive field, threatened to take markets, and that was the major problem facing the coal industry on the eve of the war.
The coal fields of central Pennsylvania, much like the southern coal fields, were dominated by large-scale absentee owners from New York City, Philadelphia, and Pittsburgh.
The operators in Somerset are not, and Ennis District too, are not really small operators. They like to say, we're a small operator, we can't afford to unionize. But what happens is they're really tied into a national network of operators. There are operator associations, regional operator associations, which are really dominated by the nationwide associations. There are railroading networks where what you have is, since the operator has to ship his coal on a railroad, pretty much the railroad is dictating what the operator does. There are also many companies which operate in different fields. So they'll operate union in one field, non-union in another, and they'll play their workers off against both.
The J.P. Morgan interest was represented by the New York Central Railroad, which owned and operated mines through its subsidiary, the Clearfield Bituminous Coal Company in Indiana and Clearfield counties. Charles Schwab's Bethlehem Steel, at the time the second largest steel manufacturer in the world, owned and operated captive mines in Cambria and Indiana counties. The Rochester and Pittsburgh Coal Company, controlled by New York City financiers, the Islams, owned mines and company towns in Jefferson and Indiana counties. The Berwyn-White Coal Company held substantial holdings in Somerset and Cambria counties. One of the company's major customers was the Interborough Transportation Company, New York City's chief public transportation network. The Central Pennsylvania mines were one of the first unionized soft coal regions in the country. The American Miners Union, the Miners National Association, and the Knights of Labor served as forerunners to today's United Mine Workers of America. The district's initial wage agreement with coal operators was signed at the Cambria County community of South Fork on May the 1st, 1899. By 1900, it had a membership of nearly 5,000. 4 years later, it was reported as the strongest district in the United States, with 34,550 members. By the early 1920s, membership had grown to over 46,000. Between 1889 and 1917, only one general strike occurred in central Pennsylvania, the 1906 strike. In the wake of 1906, operators attempted to weaken the union by carrying out a widespread blacklisting campaign, by physically intimidating union organizers with company guards and coal and iron police. Miners responded by conducting numerous local strikes. Between 1916 and 1922, over 1,000 strikes occurred in the district.
All these patterns are well underway when World War I breaks out. And what distinguishes, one of the things that distinguishes World War I and makes it such a turning point is that there's an unprecedented willingness on the part of the federal government to use its power to regulate the economy, in this case for war production, to regulate labor, to regulate culture and morals as well. You have Americanization campaigns of unprecedented severity in which the national government, in cooperation with a whole host of private institutions, very worried about the large number of immigrants and children of immigrants who are living in American society at the time, having lost faith in their capacity or their willingness to voluntarily become Americans and pledge their loyalty, decide to enforce an American loyalty, not only an American loyalty, a 100% American loyalty upon these large and largely working class populations.
Coal operators sought to regulate their workforces separate from these government programs. Their labor policies assumed they knew what was best for their workers. They sought to diminish worker dissatisfaction by providing houses, churches, and recreation. District 2 of the UMWA looked at Americanization differently. They saw it as a way to unify miners across racial and ethnic lines with a common language and democratic goals. Rank-and-file miners endorsed the establishment of Americanization schools at their 1919 District 2 convention. Americanization schools were later set up in various mining camps throughout the region.
Until you started into the first grade, you spoke your own language. And then I'd even say before the first grade, you're starting to assimilate with other kids. And you're picking up a little bit, you're playing games, you go for water for the family, water for springs, for drinking water, and you pick berries, and you're playing together. And you little kids, they're black, even today, a little black kid and a white kid can get along much easier than a parent, so to speak.
This kind of life, this kind of autonomous cultural life becomes a virtual impossibility after the fear, the hysteria, and the unprecedented willingness of the state to use its powers, its cultural and moral powers, to penetrate the lives of ordinary Americans in their local communities. And so if you imagine a combination of, on the one hand, these long-term developments, all of them leading to the increasing homogenization of the American experience, And then if you imagine that in combination with the unprecedented willingness of the American government to enter into the political and cultural lives of people in World War I, to procure their loyalty, to make sure that they were becoming American citizens in the manner in which the American government wanted them to be, then we can begin to appreciate why World War I constitutes such a moment of transformation, so that it no longer becomes possible after that time to live the kind of political or cultural life that one had lived before.
What the war meant was that whatever the coal mines produced, the U.S. economy and the Allied economies could purchase and consume. And so there was more than enough demand for northern coal and southern coal.
And what happens is at the end of the war, you have a much larger coal-producing capacity in the United States than you do at the beginning, but when the war's over, you no longer have the demand. So what you have is an industry that's swollen. There are many, many more coal miners than there have been before, many, many more mines than there have been before, and not the same need. And this creates a crisis starting in 1919.
The crisis culminated in a nationwide strike.
But the coal miners feel that as a result of wartime inflation and the immediate post-war inflation, they have fallen behind in terms of real wages. Given what happened to price levels and the sacrifices they had made during the war, they felt cheated. They thought the companies were getting too much and the workers too little.
They go on strike as they support the steelworkers, who were their neighbors. Dominic Jalot, who was a union activist and later a local town official in Nantiglow in Cambria County, is active in 1919 in Johnstown, helping the steelworkers to organize. So what you have in 1919 is the kind of the coming together of all these factors.
When the strike is deemed illegal, the Justice Department sends Bureau of Intelligence investigators all over the minefields, encourages military surveillance, prepares to use troops to maintain order, taps the phones of most of the union leaders, and encourages the Bureau of Immigration and Naturalization to take measures against alien strikers and union officials, threatening them with deportation.
The 1919 strike ended with a settlement that guaranteed the miners a 14% pay increase and the promise of an investigation of the coal industry. But the government's crackdown on immigrant workers continued. In early 1920, state police and FBI agents from Pittsburgh raided the Indiana County community of Coal Run to arrest 9 foreign-born miners for communist activities. 2 of the miners were recommended for deportation. During this period, the Union planned an organizing drive in central Pennsylvania's non-union areas to stabilize the industry. Somerset County would be one of their major focal points. The efforts were spearheaded by John Brophy, a rank and file miner who was elected president of the district in 1916. His agenda was larger than trying to organize non-union workers. He pushed for nationalization of the U.S. coal mines, the establishment of a national labor political party, and for shorter hours and a shorter work week. He also supported independent third-party efforts, such as the La Follette campaign in 1924. John L. Lewis, president of the United Mine Workers, appointed Brophy as chair of the union's Nationalization Committee.
The notion was that the nation should own the mines. Basically, Brophy's idea, and the British and the German ideas weren't that far different, that while ownership would be vested publicly, the mines themselves would be operated or run by the workers through their own union committees.
Lewis, who supported industrial capitalism and sought to project an image of responsible labor leadership, later turned against Brophy, calling the committee's action communist, and directed the union away from the proposal.
Now, in 1922, the contract that is settled in 1919-1920 between the government and the industry and the union ends. And what Brophy decides, and his supports in District 2, is This is the ideal time to launch the campaign in Somerset County. This is the campaign that will reinvigorate the local unions throughout District 2. This is the campaign that will give us a chance to nationwide promote our program of nationalization of the mine, building a labor party, union organization of the unorganized.
On April the 1st, 1922, 600,000 coal miners across the country went out on strike. Over 50,000 western and central Pennsylvania miners joined in. Banner headlines graced the front pages of the Indiana Gazette and other newspapers, calling the strike labor's greatest tie-up. Union and operators refused to speculate on how long it would last. Most industry analysts predicted a settlement would be reached within 1 month. Prior to the strike, operators and state officials made preparations for a long, drawn-out fight that in the end would be supported by anti-labor injunctions, gun-toting police, and the National Guard. The strike was nearly 100% effective in central Pennsylvania's unionized mines. Organizers, inspired by Brophy's program, called out miners in the non-union fields in Somerset and Cambria counties. Their efforts proved to be highly successful. By the third day, over 5,000 non-union miners joined the strike. Demonstrations and incidences of violence contradicted local newspaper reports that all was quiet in central Pennsylvania. One of the first bombings took place near the Garfield Smokeless Coal Company of the Indiana-Westmoreland County line. The blast destroyed the home of a mine electrician and the mine's electrical equipment, causing the company to suspend its operations. 3 non-union miners were killed when the bunkhouse they were sleeping in was dynamited at West Apollo. Another non-union miner's home was destroyed near Winburn. Operators responded to these actions by increasing their police forces and gaining injunctions that made it illegal to demonstrate or hold public meetings. The American Civil Liberties Union, the ACLU, challenged the legality of these court rulings in a free speech case in Vintondale, Cambria County. The Vintondale Colliery Company was one of the staunchest anti-union operations in the region and the last remaining company not honoring the strike. Its president, Clarence Sherwin I, vowed that he would shut the mine down rather than sign a contract with his workers. Sherwin was challenged by the ACLU's New York attorney, Arthur Garfield Hayes. Hayes and UMWA organizers who attempted to hold a public meeting in Vintondale were arrested and thrown out of town. Hayes challenged this incident in court, but in the end, the company's justice prevailed. The operators, led by Berwin White, also responded by evicting miners and their families from their homes. Evicted miners took up residencies in colonies that were comprised of tents, large barracks, and bunkhouses. Over 32 separate tent colonies existed in Fayette County alone, with evicted miners of the H.C. Frick Company inhabiting the largest encampment, which housed over 400 people in 61 tents. Barns, chicken coops, shacks, and sheds were also used when tent space was lacking. Stoves were set up outside the tents to provide meals with food that was furnished by relief groups and the union. The state inspected 70 camps and found water to be unhealthy in 41. 50 had inadequate sewage, and 2 others were declared generally unsanitary. Despite the evictions, mine worker activism and solidarity increased. With coal shortages looming on the horizon, public pressure began to mount to find a solution to the crisis. Operators responded by trying to restart the mines with the protection of coal and iron police and the National Guard. The initial request for the National Guard was made by the president of Bethlehem Steel's mining company. Citing its central location to other mines in the region, Bethlehem offered their Howard, Indiana County properties as a site for the Guard's encampment. In July, local and state newspapers issued unofficial reports that the Guard was being prepared to be sent in. Mining officials refused to comment on these reports. Later, Troop A, a machine gun and cavalry unit from Newcastle, was secretly dispatched to establish a centralized headquarters at Howard. Other units were sent throughout the region. These actions drew angry protests from labor officials. In a strongly worded letter, James H. Meyer, president of the Pennsylvania Federation of Labor, accused the government of working with the operators to crush unions. Meyer wrote, "Free speech and free assemblage have been abridged by the action of Governor Sproul in the newly organized communities. Public sentiment recoils against the announced policy of state and national governments in making Pennsylvania the bloody background and using our government and resources to force the workers into submission." Despite the urgency of their concerns, the workers' appeals fell upon deaf ears. President Harding assured the public that he would send in federal troops to protect and shield the American flag if the state and local efforts to reopen the mines failed. The reopening process did not go as smoothly as planned. Many miners were reluctant to cross the picket lines, giving the operators skeleton work crews that produced only a trickle of production. Negotiations continuously broke down and dragged on into early August. Finally, on August the 15th, 1922, a settlement was reached between Lewis and the operators, with both sides claiming victory.
If the strike really ends in what can, best be called a Pyrrhic victory, a battle that is won, but a war which is lost. Because although for the short term, the union defends its standards and conditions in the central competitive field, it has to recognize that even in that field, mines still non-unionized, and they were primarily in Somerset and Westmoreland County, Pennsylvania, will not be unionized. And they have absolutely no success in southern Appalachia. So they're left where they were before the strike.
Although a settlement was reached on the national level, UMWA miners in central Pennsylvania vowed to continue the strike until non-union operators in Somerset County recognized the union.
By September, the local miners, unionized miners, are forced to go back to work. But they make a decision to basically to tax themselves, to support the strikes in Somerset and in the other areas in central Pennsylvania that are on strike. So it's a very harsh winter. Now that the national strike is over, what the companies do is they just begin to evict the striking miners, and people spend the winter sleeping in chicken coops, in tents.
In response, the union launched a media campaign by sending a group of miners and their family members to New York City to testify at hearings on whether the city should continue purchasing Berwind-White coal for its public transportation system.
The woman testifies that her baby is born in the dead of winter in a chicken coop with no services because they were evicted by the company that's selling its coal to the New York City IRT. Well, the mayor and the city is outraged, and they send investigators. And pretty much what happens is they're able to keep the strike going. They get support from progressive groups all across the country.
Despite the success of the New York hearings, the strike in Somerset began to fade. Strike funds declined. More non-union workers were brought in, and striking miners began to migrate out of the region to look for work in other mining regions or industries. Finally, on August 14, 1923, District 2 officials voted to end the 17-month Somerset strike. Berwind-White, among other major coal firms, were successful in keeping the union out. The social cost of the 1922 strike were immense. Human rights violations included the arrest of miners carrying the American flag, mine guards raping the wife of a striker, the attempted lynching of a World War I veteran who'd been shot twice in action, the beating of 3 wives of strikers, one of whom was 9 months pregnant. Over 240 reported assaults against miners and their families, as well as numerous evictions. Union miners from central Pennsylvania gave over $900,000 for relief efforts to the strikers. Additional donations of food, money, and clothing from other groups and individuals raised the total relief to over $1 million. The outcome of the 1922 strike shaped labor relations for the rest of the decade. It also provided a battleground for a struggle between two conflicting versions of Americanism. The giant coal company's version of crushing the Union was called the American Plan. John Brophy and his supporters sought a working-class Americanism with nationalization of the mines, a labor party, and a shorter work week as its central focus. This stance displeased John L. Lewis and divided them over how the Union should respond to the crisis in the coal industry. The 1922 strike was a severe setback for the Union. Conservative forces benefited, and coal companies went on the offensive against impoverished coal miners and their increasingly fragmented and weakened union.
Down in the coal mine, underneath the ground, where a gleam of sunshine never can be found, digging dusky diamonds.
Despite the setbacks from the 22 strike, Brophy and other District 2 officials sought to unify workers along class lines by holding innovative week-long meetings called labor chautauquas that featured education and entertainment. They were held in various mining camps throughout central Pennsylvania. National figures such as Norman Thomas, head of the Socialist Party, were guest speakers at these festivities.
And what they do is they preach the Union message. And they do it through these traveling kind of shows. And they go from town to town. And this is mostly 1924, 1925. And they help in very difficult times to sustain people in their struggle. But one of the things they do is that after the Chautauqua, they follow up. At the Chautauqua, they set up ladies' auxiliaries. They set up classes for the miners. So that what happens after these tent meetings, tent revivals, I guess it runs through 26, is that you have this base. And the district maintains connections with people and have a base for educating and for sustaining the drives.
Even with these efforts, union membership continued to decline. Most progressive unionists agreed that Lewis was running the Union in the wrong direction. They responded by mounting a campaign to oust him from office. The effort became known as the Save the Union campaign, with John Brophy as their nominee for the Union's presidency. On the eve of the 26th UMWA election, the contest was a virtual dead heat. International officers kept the final results secret for 6 months and then declared John L. Lewis the winner by a landslide.
And what happens is they win, and then the election gets stolen. And they document it. What happens is the official tally shows Brophy getting about 1/3 of the vote. But when they later look at what locals voted for Brophy and what locals voted for Lewis, the locals that vote for Brophy, they're real locals. They got miners working there. And the locals that vote for Lewis are blue sky locals. Now this is a pejorative. A blue sky local is miners never see a blue sky because they're underground all day. The blue sky locals are the locals that there are no members because there's no work because everybody's above ground.
He's the only guy to ever beat John L. Lewis in an election and still not win.
Yeah.
Got more votes than the election.
I mean, Lewis uses every bit of power he has as president to ensure that Brophy won't win. After the defeat of Brophy and his people are basically expelled from the Union, you have efforts to build alliances among the progressives in which, the communists play a leading part. But once the communists appear, there's simply no limit to the red baiting that Lewis and his associates use. And Brophy cannot take the heat of the red baiting. Brophy dissociates himself from the communists, and Powis Hapgood, for one, really criticizes Brophy for his behavior.
Lewis made a final purge of his opposition at the 1927 UMWA National Convention. UMWA districts, including central and western Pennsylvania, soon followed suit. Brophy lost his post as district president and was replaced by James Mark, a Lewis loyalist. Broken and barred from the Union, Brophy and his family moved to Pittsburgh. He would later return to the Union in the early 30s to become an organizer. In addition to divisions within the Union, coal miners and their leaders faced the threat posed by a massive open shop drive.
In 1925, the operators launched a massive campaign to mechanize and change production. What they do is they shift production to the non-union mines, close down the union mines, reorganize them, bring in machinery, and then they reopen with fewer miners, or they reopen non-union.
This action, called the Open Shop Movement, was spearheaded locally by B.M. Clark, chair of the Central Pennsylvania Bituminous Coal Association and president of the Rochester and Pittsburgh Coal Company. In August of 1924, Clark notified the press that the company was closing the towns and mines at Helvetia, Clearfield County, and Adrian and Eleanora in Jefferson County due to poor market conditions. The order immediately threw over 2,000 miners out of work. Rumors circulated that R&P was really using the closing as a way to break their contract with the union. The company denied these charges until February of 1925, when they dropped a bombshell announcement. The R&P coal mines would be leased to another company called the Jefferson and Indiana Coal Company, J&I. J&I reopened the mines with non-union labor, arguing that it was their legal right to do so, since the union had a contract with R&P and not with J&I. But despite their public claims, the shift in ownership did not really take place. While J&I officials told the public they were in control, R&P continued to call the shots from behind the scenes. The union protested this action by holding a series of demonstrations at Adrian and nearby Punxsutawney. The company secured an injunction to stop these activities. While the R&P story was unfolding, action between labor and management began to heat up in other parts of the region. Bombings occurred in the community of Sagamore in response to the mine being closed there. 6 major Cambria County operations were also closed down. J&I later reopened the old R&P mine as non-union in Lucerne. Miners and their families protested these actions, but were beaten back with court injunctions and the police. The Ku Klux Klan reinforced the power of the employers' offensive.
To me, the Klan was anti-Catholic, anti-black, anti-Jewish, anti-union. To the ethnics, it meant their post to us. And in the mining towns, they kept fear they would dynamite and then burn the crosses at night.
We were all hunkies and Dagos to the others. Well, then I'd come home and I'd tell my dad, and my dad said to me, he said, "You know what you tell those kids?" He said, "You're just as much as an American as they are." Because he said, their parents come from, a lot of them come from overseas, and their grandparents, so they're not Indians, he said. The Indians are the pure Americans, he said, not them. He said, don't take that from them. So one day I did tell him, I said, "I'm just as much as American as you are." I said, "I may be from an Italian descent, but I'm an American."
So, today they don't have that.
But today, no, but at that time, yes. And they used to burn crosses, the Ku Klux Klans. And the kids used to come to school and brag about it. We are the Ku Klux Klans. Did you see that cross burning up on that hill?
The Ku Klux Klan was one of the major social movements in the 1920s. Noted officials, both on local and national level, joined the organization. President Warren Harding was sworn into the Klan at a secret ceremony in the White House's Oval Office. While the Klan marched on Washington and carried out cross burnings and lynchings throughout the U.S., over 125,000 Western Pennsylvanians joined the Hooded Order. They built Klan farms throughout the region to act as sites for their mass rallies. The Indiana Klan farm was one of the most successful in the region. Over 35,000 members attended dedication ceremonies for the farm, which was located 2 miles south of Indianaboro. One of the most violent incidents between the Klan and mine workers took place in the Cambria County community of Lilly.
One of the things happens in a little town called Lilly. A Klan comes up from Johnstown and runs marches through the town. They pick Lilly because it's largely Italian. And they're rioting and fighting goes on. And this is done relatively systematically in an effort to divide the miners.
2 mine workers and 1 Klansman died as a result of the incident. Mine workers retaliated by blowing the Indiana Klan farm up with a firebomb. Class and ethnic relations were strained more, both locally and nationally, when 2 working-class Italian immigrants named Sacco and Vanzetti were executed in 1927 on trumped-up murder charges. Many local miners rallied to their cause as they faced the same threats from ethnic prejudice and state power. The state not only played a role in the execution of Sacco and Vanzetti, but contributed to the victory of the operators in the 1927 strike. By 1927, almost all central Pennsylvania mining operations had broken their contract with the Union. The UMW did try to organize the Berwyn White mines once again, but could not gain sufficient support to sustain the effort. One of the district's last remaining companies still honoring the contract was the Clearfield Bituminous Coal Company, CBC. The company's Indiana County mine at Rossiter would be the site of one of the major battles of the 27 strike. In July, over 800 Rossiter miners joined the over 45,000 Western Pennsylvania miners already on strike since April 1st. By August 23rd, the CBC announced they were joining other operators by reopening their mines independent of the miners' union. 3 days later, the sheriff of Indiana County issued a stunning proclamation, which amounted to martial law. The order made it illegal to hold public meetings or organized demonstrations, and for more than 3 people to congregate on a public street. Violators would be charged with a misdemeanor and subject to 3 to 7 years imprisonment. Operators also established mandatory curfews where all lights had to be out and everyone off the streets by 10 o'clock. Nearly every county in central Pennsylvania issued similar proclamations.
So many guys get together, they come and say, hey, move, that's the Coal and Iron Police. Hey, that was that way right here in Indiana. You didn't have to come to Ernest. You see 5 or 6 guys together, they'd come and the cops say, hey, move. So that wasn't only in the coal mining towns, it was throughout this area.
But we did have one lady beat the police up. But I don't want to mention her name, but she beat the hell out of him because he hit her husband. So she really gave it to me. She stoned his horse and she stoned him. And she cut him right here across, and the blood was running down. I said, that's where you should have had a picture. I mean, she was a woman about, well, she was a real tall woman, big. She beat him up, and that's what he needed.
Indiana County's Judge Langham issued a sweeping injunction in Rossiter, which blocked all of the activities of the strikers and UMWA officials. The ruling forbade picketing, marching, or gathering for meetings or rallies. It also forbade newspaper advertisements and other means of communication. The most controversial aspect of the ruling, which would thrust Rossiter into national headlines, was the order that prohibited singing hymns and holding church services on lots owned by the Magyar Presbyterian Church.
He laid down the law. So let's face it, there's no union. You lay down the law, you obey it. Hell, these third world countries, from the ruler, it's like God speaking. You obey it.
In late February 1928, the Interstate Commerce Committee of the U.S. Senate arrived in Indiana County to investigate the conditions of the coal industry in western and central Pennsylvania. They came to Indiana to find more information about the judge and the town that made the Rossiter injunction infamous. After arriving in Indiana, Senator Gooding, Republican from Idaho and chair of the committee, told reporters, "It is inconceivable that such squalor, misery, and distress should be tolerated in the heart of one of the richest industrial centers of the world. The committeemen met women and children living in hovels, which are more unsanitary than a modern swine pen. They are breeding places of sickness and crime. They constitute fertile fields for the sow of communism and other doctrines which teach the overthrow of the American government. The committee made an on-site visit to the Magyar Presbyterian Church in Rossiter and heard stories about human rights violations from striking miners and their families. They also saw barracks constructed of 1-inch boards and tar paper that housed 33 families. In all, over 67 families were reported to be living in destitution in Rossiter. The senators returned to Indiana to interview Judge Langham. The judge told the committee that a striker had no right to persuade or restrain someone who wanted to go to work, and that the hymns sung by the workers were hostile songs. The committee was not impressed with what they heard, and generally agreed that the injunction amounted to an invasion of basic civil liberties guaranteed by the U.S. Constitution. Shortly after the committee returned to Washington, Pennsylvania Governor John Fisher, a native of Indiana County, issued a scathing response to the senators. The governor had special interest in the coal industry. Prior to becoming governor, he served as an attorney and director of the CBC and was a personal friend of Judge Langham. Fisher rose to defend Langham and asserted that the judge should have brought all of the senators before him and fined them or had them thrown in jail. Their acts made up a very ridiculous performance.
Basically, they uncover a pattern of what they call company autocracy or company tyranny, company violation of workers' basic constitutional rights. They find what's called industrial serfdom, but they don't do much about it.
The presence of the committee cast Rossiter and Judge Langham into the national spotlight. But in the end, it would be the company's wealth, political power, local media support, in addition to the injunction, that would combine to defeat the strikers. By the end of August 1928, virtually every mine in District 2 was operating non-union and at lower wages for the miners.
I owe my soul to the company store.
How the people survived, everybody had gardens. Practically everybody. They had to. They had animals. I mean, chickens, hogs, cows, if you had facilities on your plot of ground. And of course, people hunted. They fished. They went out for fruits on farms. Now, some farmers would permit them, some wouldn't.
In the summertime, we'd go out picking dandelions, and you'd make them all kind of way with beans or potatoes, and that's what we ate. Then you can can those dandelions, and the mothers always had to can. That's all you did was work.
Yeah, work. Canning. You ate from the garden.
Then they had coal stoves, and if you wanted, they used to use boilers. I still have my boiler over there. And they'd boil the clothes, you know.
To get them clean.
Not like today, you don't. You just stick them in the automatic.
Women played an important role in numerous activities, including organizing relief efforts, taking care of children and the disabled, and helping organize picket lines and demonstrations. Fanny Sellens was one of the first UMWA women organizers in the region. She stood firm for workers' rights, regardless of race or ethnicity. Her life was cut short when coal and iron police beat her to death while she was organizing mine workers along the Westmoreland, Allegheny County, near New Kensington, during the 1919 coal strike.
All over Pennsylvania, Fanny spread the Union word. In the coalfields and the company towns, her voice of hope was heard. United we will bargain, but divided we must beg. Fanny Sellens spread the dreams of the UMWA.
August 26, 1926, 2 explosions ripped through Clymer Mine number 1 at Sample Run. 57 men were in the mine. 44 never made it out alive. Mike Puro was 17 at the time. Both he and his father, John, were working that day.
It happened quick, so my dad told me to get out, and I said, I ain't going till you go. He said, I can't make it.
Okay, now about our life in the coal mines, after the explosion. My dad was killed in the coal mine in 1926, John Puro. My brother Mike's sitting right here on the end. He was 17 years old, and he was dragging my father out, and my dad told him, son, he said, go or we won't make it. He says, you go or we'll both die. So Mike had to make a tough decision, and Mike went ahead and left my dad behind to die. It wasn't Mike's decision, but it was the toughest decision of his life. And I give Mike credit because he was our big brother. He kept us out of an orphanage because my mother was widowed with 13 children. And I give Mike a lot of credit for keeping us out of an orphanage.
The Clymer disaster was one of the 3 major mining disasters that hit the region in the 1920s. 80 men lost their lives in the 1922 Spangler-Cambria County disaster. All 32 were killed at the Barnes and Tucker Coal Company near Shanktown, Indiana County, on June 27, 1924.
So part of the legacy we are looking at of the labor movement of the United States is a legacy that was developed by coal miners. Coal miners and their families were very busy, but they had time not only to develop families, but to build churches, to form ethnic organizations, and to be pillars of their communities. Thus, the story that we are telling is a story of the past, but it's also a story of the present, and it's also something to remember for the future, because as we end this century and look toward a new century, hopefully we can learn and be inspired by those who died in this disaster and by their friends and relatives and others who honor them. And with their spirit and with a sense of solidarity, that the future will have a brightness that they would most appreciate and that they help to create.
Off to work in the morning like any other day. They never knew about the price they'd have to pay. Their families and friends that they left behind live with this nightmare time after time. There was an explosion and the rocks came crashing down. A fiery hell in their world underground. Working the coal mines to feed the families that they loved. Now they rest with their gods in the heavens above.
Conditions in the coal mines worsened following the 27th strike. Families were reported living in abandoned beehive coke ovens and shanties. A Pennsylvania Health Department report found the region had some of the highest infant mortality rates in the state's history, with over 100 deaths occurring per 1,000 live births. The region had begun to slide into the Great Depression.
What happens is that the union is destroyed in central Pennsylvania. It's really the coal miners' union. By 1929, there are only 100,000 members in the United Mine Workers of America. I think the peak had been about 400,000 in 1921. By 1929, 3/4 of membership is gone. Really, the union is outside of Illinois is just a paper union. They have paper locals, paper districts, but they don't have any members.
As a result of this decline, some rank-and-file miners became disgruntled with the UMWA and broke off to join a more radical union associated with the Communist Party called the National Miners Union. Portage, Cambria County, became the organization's major base of operation in central Pennsylvania, with over 800 members. The National Miners staged one major strike in the region in 1931 in Armstrong and Indiana counties. These actions prompted UMWA officials to increase their efforts to win back the miners to the UMW. Over 4,000 miners did rejoin the Union, but these gains were short-lived as operators increased their surveillance and the region slipped further into the Depression. Many miners organized and joined unemployment committees to protect their interest. Some participated in the 1932 Unemployed March on Washington, organized by Reverend Cox of Pittsburgh, in an effort to bring the plight of the unemployed to the nation's political establishment.
Fellow citizens, more than 25,000 American citizens have journeyed all the way from Pittsburgh to Washington to ask for the right to work. It is a right that belongs to every man, a God-given right, and we demand it from the President, the Senate, and the House of Representatives. I thank you.
The impact of the Depression discredited big business and drove the conservative coalition, represented by President Herbert Hoover, out of office. The UMW emerged from the 1920s as a broken and splintered union. Although the decade was marked by defeats and some of the worst human rights violations in the early 20th century, miners continued to protest and agitate for a more equitable distribution of wealth, with a working-class version of Americanism and democracy at its heart. Ultimately, their hopes, dreams, and sacrifices helped set the stage for the return of the UMWA and the rise of industrial unionism in the 1930s. This progressive movement, which drew support from FDR's New Deal, won the loyalty of coal miners from central Pennsylvania.
I am a jovial collier lad, as blithe can be. And let the times be good or bad, they're all the same to me. It's little of this world I know, and care less for its ways. For where the dog star never glows, I wear away my days. Down in the cold, underneath the ground, where a gleam of sunshine never can be found, digging dusky diamonds all the year around, down in a coal mine underneath the ground. My hands are horny, hard, and black from working in the vein, and like the clothes upon my back, my speech is rough and plain. Well, if I stumble with my tongue, I've one excuse to say. It's not the collier's heart that's bad, it's his head that goes astray. How little do the great ones care who sit at home secure. What hidden dangers colliers dare, what hardships they endure. The very fires their mansions boast to cheer themselves and wives, mayhap were kindled at the cost of jovial colliers' lives. Down in the coal mine, underneath the ground, where a gleam of sunshine never can be found, digging dusky diamonds all the year